hope I hope that most of you, we are not catching up in the middle of the night. For those, we are waking up or keeping awake. Sorry for that, but that's the downside of being almost CO2 neutral and not flying to one place to discuss all these issues. Welcome to the second workshop on tourism monitoring in Antarctica, hosted by the German Federal Environmental Agency. And I'm really looking forward to discuss with you, or most of you, the next 3 days. The first day is on monitoring possibilities from distance. So we're looking at what can we do via databases, satellite data, and other things. But before we start with a couple of presentations and entering the discussion, I would like to have some welcome words by the federal agency, German Federal Agency. So
yes, I can take over.
Yeah.
Yes, I also would like to welcome you on our second workshop on tourism monitoring in Antarctica. I think we had a very fruitful workshop last year in connection with the ATCM in Berlin. And I hope that we can have also these 3 days in order to discuss once again tourism, but on a different basis. I think we have a good had a good starting point last year, and now we will have our second workshop as we promised last year. And I would like to give over to my colleague Rita, and she will have some more words about the content and all the things which are connected with the 3 days of the second workshop. Rita, it's your turn.
Thank you, Heike. So I'm taking over. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome from my side as well. I'm really glad that so many of you are participating in the second workshop, even though it means getting up early, as Thomas said, or working late for some of you. Thank you for joining and wanting to be part of this important discussion. For those of you who do not know me already, my name is Rita Farkas. I'm working at the German Environment Agency, and I'm the initiator of this project in general. And I have a great team that maybe will introduce themselves a little bit later from Fresh Thoughts Consulting and INAC. And I want to thank you in advance for organizing our second workshop today. So as for the project, why are we doing all this? Antarctica, as all of you know, the Antarctic environment is under pressure, and not only from the global effects like climate change, but also from the footprints human activities leave locally. And as the tourist numbers are rising, so are the potential impacts that are still poorly understood. And we can't deny that we have a certain lack of targeted regulations concerning this touristic and other non-governmental activities, because basically we lack the data for informed decision making. So we thought, what are we going to do about this? You see, our objectives are that this project aims to give, first of all, an overview of the current knowledge about the impacts of tourism in Antarctica, and our main goal, for which those workshops are ideal, I think, is to develop a monitoring framework for those tourist activities, like a toolkit that we hopefully can present next year at the ATCM. So therefore, overall advancing the protection of the Antarctic environment. Next slide, please. You see that our duration, the project is coming to an end next year. As I already said, we want to present the results next year on ATCM. So here are the working packages. Sorry for my cat. We have developed the literature research already, but this is not to be the topic today. You will find that in the final report eventually. And today is about working package 2, the second workshop. for the next 3 days, and overall working package 3, the development of this comprehensive framework that we're all talking about. So yeah, well, this is the short introduction on the project, why we're doing it, if you didn't know before. So I'll give the word to Thomas again, and hope to have a really interesting workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita. Here is a short overview of the program. As we are quite a lot of people, we will skip the round of introduction because that would take more than 10 minutes because we are to some extent overwhelmed by the interest we gained here. The rules are, if you make a statement, then please say your name and your organization you're representing. So that is basically a thing for the working groups, but also when you come into the other question and answers after the presentation. The first presentation I will follow up is basically giving where we are in the project and what we have identified as challenges so far and gaps. Then we give a short introduction to the parallel workshop. We will then have a short break and as the last part, a short reflection on the results from the working group. So we are basically summarizing what we have heard and then have a brief outlook for tomorrow's day. And tomorrow we will start with recapturing what has happened today, because there are some participants which are only attending 1 or 2 days. Having said this, maybe for an important rule, please raise your hand when you want to say something. We have planned for question and answer session. So that's one possibility, or write the question into the chat. Then we will pick that up as well after this presentation. As Rita said, the overall aim of this project is to expand the knowledge base on the impacts of tourism activities on Antarctica. There are some areas where we don't know if there are impacts, so we need to increase the knowledge base. The other thing is to inform future management decisions and to advance the protection of the Antarctic environment. This is in particular important as we know from statistics that tourist interest is increasing and the number of tourists is is increasing every year. And then it should also provide the basis for an early warning system to detect impacts that are more than minor or are gaining momentum because of the number of activities increasing. As briefly already described, and you might remember the results presented in the workshop in Berlin last year. We went through a compilation of research papers, literature, published scientific articles, and started to analyze them. We developed an analytical matrix for this analysis, so we can also filter the information found so far. At the moment, we have about 130 documents looking at the different impacts of tourism activities coming from all over the world. I have to say, main limitation here is that we only looked into documents which are in English. So if someone has published something in Spanish or German or French, it's not fully covered, except there is an English abstract. As described also in Berlin, we are using the driver pressure state impact response concept developed by the European Environmental Agency and basically now applied in many global activities and international agreements. The drivers are basically the activities tourists are doing. Yeah, so we have cruising, water-based activities, activities on land, and flights, and they lead or can lead to pressures on the environment, like pollution, for example. And the state then is the status of the environment. So we have a clean environment, easy said, or a polluted environment, or a disturbed environment, which is the state. And that again has an impact also on the ecosystem. And in order to fix that problem, we can take response actions, which are basically management actions. And these response actions can refer to the driver's back, but also to the pressures and to the state. And our main focus at the moment is to monitor drivers and pressures. To some extent, we have information on the state. We have not started to look into the issue of responses and the impact to a broader scale so far. Here again, the concept based on an example. So in the top part here, we start with the driver. So it's the movement on land, like hiking, mountain biking, skiing, whatever. And the driver is tourism, that's clear. There are also other drivers in Antarctica in general, but we are focusing on tourism, and that driver results in pressures like litter, visual and acoustic interaction with the wildlife, pathogens, loss of fibers and skin cells, and that then has an impact on the state. And we are classifying that according to the protocol Article 3. So we're looking into soil, ice, snow, terrestrial wildlife, terrestrial plants. And then the last thing or the big purple square are the impacts. So we will have impacts on the wildlife, might be a change of distribution, change of behavior, damage to the vegetation, can be dissemination of invasive species, etc. And based on that, then if these impacts are measured or identified and can be granted for sure, then management responses need to be taken, which can be a coordination of landing, prohibition of certain areas, minimum distance rules for the wildlife, in distance to the wildlife. That was the easy one. That is the more complex one based on the literature research. I'm not going to read that out of you. You have seen that probably in Berlin, and if not, send us a short message. We can share that detailed flow chart with you. This is basically based on the literature analysis we did, and it's available for different types of tourism. So not only as shown here for land-based, it's also available for shipping, for flights, and other minor or less big activities. What we have then started is to identify indicators and monitoring methods that are used in other parts of the world and can be used here. And this is exactly where the workshop comes in, because what we realized as a result is there is quite a lot of areas where we don't have indicators and monitoring methods in place. I also have to say, when it comes to monitoring methods, we have to be a bit cautious in also what you will find as a result, because for certain substances, for example, there are quite a broad range of methods you can apply. And I have to say, our team is not, for example, a team of experts that deal with chemical pollution. So this is probably something for further work. When you say, or when there is an agreement that these issues should be monitored, then probably there's a need for expert groups that will really define the monitoring methods in detail, because related to these monitoring methods, there is also a relation on how expensive they can be and become. And that is something that really needs an integrated or a common vision and a broad discussion among the parties to agree on the methods. We also have identified areas where there is no monitoring method technically available so far. For example, underwater noise, there is quite the challenge. But maybe we are wrong, and some of you have heard or are using already things we are not aware of. So this is also a focus of the workshop, to bring in your knowledge here. Step 4 is something for the future, the development of a prioritization approach. So basically the question is, what can we do with the resources in terms of human resources, but also financing resources to set up the monitoring scheme? Because we don't have the golden horn where the money comes endless, even if some countries are thinking of this after COVID, but this is not the case. So we have to set priorities, and the question is where to put the focus. Yeah, are we going for the very small things that probably might cause huge problems, or are we going for the large affected areas, but with little impact? So that's something we need to discuss in the next phase of the project after the workshop. We are still in the phase of preparing this prioritization approach. It's not just expert judgments. We are trying to develop a transparent approach that is based on data and the information we have so far. The picture you see here below is just an example. We have not finalized this yet. Yeah, what are the challenges and gaps so far? As you have seen in the diagrams before, we are facing a complex causal relationships between the different driver, pressure, state, impact, response elements. We have to face direct and indirect contributions and local impacts, or we have to face direct and indirect contributions of tourism to local impact, but also global environmental change impacts. I mean, climate change is not climate change affecting Antarctica is not something that is just done by the tourists in Antarctica. It's a bit a broader thing. And then we have to deal with the issue of short versus long-term impacts, cumulative impacts, and non-linear changes. Here, I have to say on the last two things, also research is very, very much at the beginning from what we found in the literature. Yeah, so this is something we probably research has to focus more in the next years. But I have to say, also working in other areas of the world, this is always the case. Cumulative impacts are also quite a challenge for European seas or global oceans. So these issues are not surprisingly a challenge for the Antarctica. There is general and insufficient knowledge about the ecosystem and the impacts of human activities. So there is still a lot of issues not fully understood, or research is just short-term and one project, and we don't know the long-term relationship between the two. The issue of local contexts is also a very important one, and the behavior of tourists and tour operators. So because they are always different. Yeah. The lack of monitoring methods is it clear, because otherwise we wouldn't have this research project. and we are facing also practical limitations on the monitoring on the impacts in this environment, because it's not as we can do it on continental sites where we have much more resources, possibilities to monitor the impacts over a long term perspective so far. Another challenge is the lack of baseline data. So what is the state of the environment? Is it already bad? Is it good? What is the status here? We don't have like a reference condition. The other thing is there are monitoring approaches. The question is how to incorporate them in a overall system. The issue is also financial resources. So the monitoring system itself has to be affordable. There is the issue of different stakeholders and different organizations being involved, and they have to agree politically on a common system, which is a challenge on its own. And then we still need to find a good link between the monitoring results when the monitoring is stable and possible management solutions. So this is my introduction to the project. These are the questions to the working group, but I think I will start with questions and answers before we go to the breakout groups, and I stop sharing my presentation now. Exactly. So if there are any questions, comments, just raise your hand, or I don't see anything in the chat so far. There is a question from Nancy. If you could turn on your camera, and please, Nancy, go ahead. What? No? No hand up? Okay. Okay, no questions. Well, then we are ahead of time, I would say. And we can split up in the working groups.
Yeah,
I think.
I would need a couple
No,
of...
there is one question.
Perfect. Yeah.
Damon.
Hello, everybody. My name is Damon Stanwell-Smith. I'm the head of science and sustainability of the operator Viking. By brief background, I used to work at the World Conservation Monitoring Centre, where I was head of the marine programme and specifically oversaw the indicator development there. And then more recently, I was for a while at the IATO Secretariat, where I was one of Gina's predecessors. At the risk of straying philosophically away from DIPSIR as a framework, I just wanted to flag that in the course of using DIPSIR as a framework for global biodiversity and ecosystem assessments and things like that over many years, a simpler framework of pressure state benefit response was how it evolved, on the premise that measuring impact is very challenging from a monitoring point of view. And it also, I don't know whether in terms of policy interventions, understanding, if you like, the positive side of visitors visiting Antarctica as well as, the perceived negatives. I don't know if this is the frame to discuss that or if this is already sort of the direction of travel, but I'm just listening with interest to your presentation and is my first reflection.
Yeah, I think that's the right point for this kind of discussion. So I have to say, if you think that a different approach is better, we can discuss this. And the other thing is, if you have any kind of publication related to this, you can recommend to us, then please feel free to send it over, because as I said, this is an ongoing research project. We are not presenting the final results, and we are having this workshop exactly to get your feedback. Yeah.
No, I'll be delighted. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? If not, then I would say it's now I don't see. Let me see. So I share my screen again. No. Okay. I don't see the PowerPoint presentation anymore on my sharing format.
So Thomas, maybe when you're looking for, I can fill the back.
I have it.
The gap.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I do a comment to Damon's comment, which I really appreciate very much. Thanks, Damon, for saying that. So monitoring the impact for sure doesn't mean that we find an impact and a negative impact. So the results of a monitoring process is always open. So a monitoring concept can also, not the concept, but the monitoring concept procedure can also come to the results that tourism doesn't have in that or that question an impact. So thanks for mentioning it, but yes, there could be positive impacts as well.
Okay. The working group should last now from our time 2 o'clock to 3:20, but I think being half an hour ahead, we can start now and close this at 3 o'clock, which gives the people in the, well, from my geographical location, eastern part of the world, a more early go to bed time. Yeah, so the first question is, what can be monitored from distance based on satellites and travel reports, but also probably other sources? And there are different aspects to be considered, and you have seen this in the invitation already. Is the relevant data already being collected, and what needs to be improved to this collection? What are appropriate monitoring methods, or which of them are available, and where can they be used? What are we doing with data gaps? Can we close them from distance, or do we have to go on site? And who could be in charge of the data collection? So that's the question. As we are less people now active, I would not split into working groups, but keep this discussion, because when I see the people on the screen, it's only 30, and I think if we split in smaller groups and being in silence, it can be quite boring. So first of all, I encourage you to make your statements, but I think it's better to stay in one big group here for today at least. We have the time also for a bit of an extended discussion, not extensive for sure, but extended. So if we are half an hour ahead, so yeah, we can stay in one group. So again, what can we do from distance? What needs to be improved? What about travel reports? So just to remind you, and I don't know who want to do the first Antarctic icebreaker and make a first comment or reflection on that question.
If no one wants, I shall break the ice. Thank you, Thomas, for the introduction and the presentation, and thank you, Damon, for the first initial question. It's always appreciated, and I hope we will have a fruitful discussion. So we have sorted these 3 days according to the monitoring possibilities, and this is the first day where we thought about what data could we just get freely without even having to visit, having to go there, being present. And of course, first of all, there comes the PVRs and all the information that's already in the ATS system, in the EIS, written down. But from my perspective, as I have to deal with this reportings frequently, it's not the best solution. The data is collected by IATO, thankfully, and this is a very valuable source that I always look to. But the official reporting is lacking some consistency and some user friendliness, and so we were thinking about indicators and what we could get from this data. So maybe the travel reports and the PVRs are a valuable source for us, like counting the numbers, counting the ships. The information is there already, and we could gain background data from this. Sorry for the cat. So I'd like to know what you're all thinking about that approach.
I think, yeah, there are already some people in the bedtime mode.
So what is the housekeeping, Thomas? Do we lift the hands or we start just talking?
There is one, yeah, I would say raise the hand. Raise the hand. I have one question or comment in the chat. Hello, everybody. It is possible for tourism to have positive social, cultural, and other effects, but it is possible for tourism to have positive environmental effects, ? This distinction is important if the subject of this discussion is to monitor the environmental impact of tourism. So yes, we are focusing on the environmental impacts in this workshop, not on social and cultural effects. No, but I mean, in fact, at the moment, people can just start to speak because, and if it's getting a bit chaotic, I will ask to raise the hand first. Damon, again.
Hello, everybody. And the mention of again, I was cautious to intervene the second time, given that we want to stimulate a conversation. I want to just bring up something, the relevance of my first intervention and how this might help frame what we're discussing now. I had the opportunity in the noughties, if you like, 2008 through 2014, to work at the World Conservation Monitoring Centre. And we developed all of the indicators, we facilitated the development of all the indicators for what was then the HE targets towards the 2020 biodiversity targets, and also had a lot of discussions around the monitoring. The relevance to this is that the relationship between monitoring, indicators, targets, and also what the questions that we want to achieve, what became evident in both the development of what was called the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, NBSAPs, nationally and also internationally, which I think is very relevant, and I feel very sort of strongly about that the monitoring in this context is as impactful and appropriate as possible, is that as the follow-up to my first question about the idea that monitoring isn't just about a negative story, it's if you like, it's direction neutral is very important. But the second point is, what are the questions that are being asked? And to frame indicators and targets, the syntax of asking the questions, which then can be turned into targets/indicators, and then having monitoring that feeds those, was absolutely the most effective way of finding meaningful tools to assist with policy decision support, as opposed to saying, what are the data we have? What can we tell from it? And so data-led, although this isn't to take away from the previous request about what are the available data, the data-led situations where there may be a natural, some data that are available, some aren't, did not result in policy decision support tools that were as useful. And so maybe one of the things to interject into this discussion is, if we have clarity on the kind of questions we want to ask, it will assist us in working out what data are required to do a thought experiment that may identify some gaps. And typically, when this is done in many other contexts, there are numerous data sources. I think, the nature of us all working in Antarctica, there will be numerous data sources that laterally, if we think about it, will come to light. I'll stop there.
Thank you for this. I mean, the overall question that drives us is, are there environmental impacts from tourism at all? So the monitoring at the moment is not, how to say, sufficient to answer this question with a yes or a no. Yeah, so that's a bit of the background of this activity. And we looked into how the biodiversity framework was set up in a couple of countries, but I think the difference here is that we don't have a target in that way, like in the biodiversity, where you say, okay, we want to increase biodiversity, or we want to keep that level, or maybe I misunderstood your comment, but this is where.
Well, when I say target, and it's a fair point, is that I think having I suspect even in this forum and in any forum discussing Antarctica, there are different desired outcomes around the number of perceived private sector visitors to Antarctica. So that by itself is going to be, I think, there's going to be a spread of maybe some that would choose to have none. There'll be some that at a certain level, there'll be some that would maybe want more, depending on one's perception. I think the key point, as I see it, and I defer to, there's obviously a lot of expertise in this forum, is that measuring marine impact, in my experience, in my career, is a real challenge. And in fact, meaningfully measuring impact arguably is impossible. And therefore the proxy is pressure. And so if one takes a precautionary approach and understands pressures as well as one can, then that causal relationship between pressure and impact, if one reflects on how the indicators were developed for Marine Strategy Framework Directive, for example, which I had a hand in as well, the exact same issues in the EU was at the time the same with looking at frameworks, a number of the UN, of the Rio Conventions, looking at the indicators that are developed over the years. We all collectively want to know if cumulative impact is occurring, and maybe there is a sort of sense that at times that may or may not be occurring. Trying to pin down a metric or metrics that tell you quantitative of that is the devil's in the detail. And one way to progress it, I think, is that we have a meaningful set of pressure measurements. At the moment, this is a topic I'm very interested in, and it's and I although you see that I'm speaking as the perspective of a private sector operator, I see this more broadly as protection of the continent. Is that if there are metrics beyond just numbers of private sector tourists, it's other metrics that tell us a more meaningful side. And that's what I see. When I was in my post at IATO, I saw that as an incomplete measure. It's the one that is often cited. But looking at the range of pressure monitoring that can tell a more complete story feels to me a way to progress, rather than trying to tease out an aspect of impact where the drivers of that and the the causality of that will be up for so much debate that there will be never any meaningful policy that comes from it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit the issue in this project, that we try to go beyond just saying, okay, this is the number of tourists coming every year, and that so we want to combine this, and this is also how we structured this 3 days. So what can we do probably by satellite data? What can we do by global CO2 emission monitoring and this kind of things? And then the next 2 days are on very specific, like ships. What can we do with this information? What can we do with on the land? Yeah, because you're right. Just looking at one pressure is not sufficient. Yeah, or driver, we call it in that case, the tourism as a driver. I mean, what we have done so far is also looked into quite a while into the MSFD monitoring, that which is for non-Europeans the EU legislation to monitor the status of European seas, and that's done along 11 descriptors which are describing the state of the environment. And but again, Damon, it's the first thing of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive is again setting the target and looking into what I mean, the big difference here is in Europe we know that our environmental situation in the seas is not good, so the objective is to improve it. But this is not the case in Antarctica. We don't know if tourism are having an impact. So it's a bit a different task we are aiming at. And at the moment, I think, as you described, there are people who want 0 people there because they think per definition a tourist is negative. But when I look into the chat, people are starting the benefits of tourism in the Antarctica on the other side. So we have to find the right balance. And you're absolutely right. Monitoring per se is not negative or positive. It's just describing changes in the environment. Yeah. And that is something we definitely will stress also in our report, that monitoring is just providing information, but the decisions what to do with this information is then a political one. Yeah.
Can I pick up this? Sorry, Thomas. Just
no, that's good, because I don't want to have a bilateral discussion with Damon with 36 others in the room.
No, it's fine.
Interesting, but thought, not the purpose of this workshop.
We have 3 days, and 2 days are still ahead of us. And I was just I just wanted to remind everybody that we're talking about establishing a framework that would be a first. We have several monitoring projects on several aspects somewhere in Antarctica, but there is hardly any valuable baseline data that we could compare our data that we hope to gain in the future to. And today is about the data that we could already get quite easily. So this is about getting data for the drivers and certain pressures. So for giving the framework for all this monitoring, maybe we should be thinking about not only one aspect, like looking at the drivers, looking at the pressures, not only looking at the state. We want to have a framework. We want to have different people, different stakeholders, different methods involved. And so we are looking for the data that we can gain right now for having an overview of the pressures we're facing, of the drivers and the amount even, so that we can get a bigger picture eventually. So this is today's aim, and tomorrow we'll talk about possibilities for the sea. So there we get more to the state of the environment approach, and on day 3 it's about land-based things that we want to look at. So today we would like to focus on the things that we could get for having a look at the pressures and the drivers. I see a lot of nodding, but no one wants to take up the word. I mean, I love talking to Thomas and Damon for the entire time.
Attila.
Hello, everyone. This is Atilla Yılmaz from Turkish Polar Research Institute. So I guess we are now discussing about the last slide involving the questions about satellite imagery and the travel reports. So though I'm not expert of the both things, I will just have some remarks and play as another icebreaker role for the workshop. So to my knowledge, the state-of-art satellite imagery is not high qualified enough to supply very high resolution imagery. So when we talk about observing the impacts of tourism or drivers or pressures, so it will be almost impossible with today's technology to detect small changes. But we can say this is only limited to the imagery. We can also supply some data, for example, some chlorophyll A levels can be estimated by these satellite data, and unusual levels in tourism areas may be attributed with the high nutrient input, for example, just saying. And we are also, during our research in Antarctica, applying some aerial drone imagery, but I can say this is within the same context with the satellite imagery, because you have to be there to fly these aerial drones. But these supply very high resolution, talking about a centimeter difference in the imagery, and you can easily detect small changes. So to sum up,
Attila, can I ask a question? What are you using these drones for? What are you monitoring with it? That would be interesting.
Actually, currently not for environmental monitoring directly, but for the changes in the glaciers.
Okay.
Each year we are taking in the very same areas with very high precision coordination, and then comparing these imageries to estimate and detect the changes in the glacials.
But are you relating this to CO2 emissions or concentrations in the atmosphere, or what is the relation you are trying to identify here then? Or are you just monitoring the change and say, okay, there is a change, but we don't know why?
Sure. About natural and anthropogenic impacts that's driving the glaciers to change, mainly the climate change, I would say. So only major changes can be observed, but over a very long time period. So we can be too late to intervene these changes when we have this long time period. And for travel reports, these are, of course, subjective documents, which is filled out from a person's perspective. And to be useful in a scientific manner, this should be in an objective way. So only trained and informed personnel about this travel report may make it useful for the environmental reporting. So I don't have very much information about it, but I know a Turkish researcher working on crowdsourced photos to extract some geological features. I think it's some new technology, so it will be useful. I may link the researcher directly to the interested people. Right now, she's collecting all photos from all visitors in Antarctica, and she will try with some computer vision and image processing to extract some features. Maybe that technology can be also helpful for the environmental monitoring. And that's all I will say for now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Quite interesting. I see another hand raised by Gina from IATO. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And I didn't want to necessarily repeat some of the things that we talked about in the workshop last year in Berlin. But as it relates to this conversation, it probably bears mentioning and saying something about. I think last year, a couple of things we talked about included the satellite image, specifically Dr. Heather Lynch's lab at Stony Brook University. They've done extensive work in monitoring various penguin populations down there over the years. The technology has allowed them to understand what is going on at the level of a size of a piece of paper. That is how great the technology and the access of what they have is. So it's really made a big difference. So that is remote work. I know this past year at ATCM. The UK had also submitted a paper regarding their work because they're doing more in that realm. So those are two opportunities that immediately come to mind. And I think some of the data that's been coming out in those has been very useful. I think the thing that needs to be balanced, and Rita, I don't know if this was something that we end up getting into more when we talk about ship-based stuff, but you know, I know drones were just mentioned, but there are also several places on the continent, specifically in the peninsula, where there are cameras there. And I know Tom is on, so Tom would probably be the better person to talk about some of this. But there are cameras there that are taking images of the penguin populations and what's going on. There is also another project, the Extreme Ice Survey, and they are taking images of certain glaciers and the changes in those glaciers over time. Those are supported. I would say they're gathering the information and studying everything remotely. It is supported through ship work and mostly through IATO members, because we are helping provide the technical support in terms of removing the SD cards and making sure the power source is still good. But those are things also that are option, and the data is out there and it's being collected. It's just a matter of what's being seen and what's available. But things like that are definitely viable. And those are projects that IATO members are in and they support. The one thing I would say, whether it's satellite image or that remote sensing with the images, what's important there though as well is supplementing it with other things, because you do need that boots on the ground perspective to also give perspective on what's going on, because I think, you know, nothing is ever absolute. So it's good to be able to see something from multiple levels and multiple views to understand what that change is. So anything that would happen, I would always caution. It's important to not just get maybe satellite, maybe remote cameras, but also drone and human actually seeing and viewing, because it may tell a slightly different story.
Thank you, Gina. I have first Rita and then Tom Hart.
I would give Tom the word first, because I think he's going to say what I would say anyway, at least part of.
Tom, go ahead, please. We can't hear you. It looks... So either your headset is not working because your microphone is on.
So then I will chime in. Thank you, Gina, for this valuable input. We're also aware that you're providing a lot of technical and logistical support to all those approaches, and yes, totally, we agree that there needs to be a multiple layered approach for this whole framework. That's what I was referring to earlier. What I'm thinking about is that we should have made clearer maybe that we're looking in this framework for indicators that are more directly linkable to touristic activities. This is what we set out to do, because the monitoring discussions are coming up at ATCM level and the parties next year as well. So there will be a lot of discussions on environmental monitoring, and so we already identified that, or we already found that penguin counts are not directly linkable, are not very suitable to touristic activities, and it's really hard to define how touristic and other non-governmental activities have influence on penguin populations, because there are so many levels on which penguin populations can be influenced, and even so with a glacier retreat, I mean, this whole satellite discussion is really interesting, and it's a very valuable input, and it's a method that can be utilized very much, I guess, even so in the future. We sometimes or often lack the probable method to answer the questions that we would have in relation to tourism. resolution, but maybe we can also already see how trampling of vegetation is being seen by satellites, or how well, maybe how the landing sites are looking like during the seasons. That could also give valuable input for future management decisions, like opening sites for certain time periods, or when the season should start. That was my 5 cents to this ideas. So Tom, I hope it's working.
Tom, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me? Ah, great. Yeah, I mean, I have quite a lot of observations from that, I think. So for the penguin numbers, the data actually show no difference on numbers associated with tourism activity. So, I mean, we need to be very careful. That actually means no impact, rather than assuming we haven't just found impact yet. And the counterfactual to that we've recently found with COVID is actually there was an impact around Port Lockroy when Lockroy was shut. We are continuing those for that analysis for other sites, and it's possible that there may be local impact at other sites. But I'm slightly concerned that we're not treating this. We're treating this as a one-tailed test, only looking for negativity, rather than approaching this with an open mind. I think the thing I take from Damon is that actually, absolutely, the cumulative impacts are vital, and no one's really considering those. Especially, I think we need to treat all human activity and its footprint as like for like, and that means national program activities and tourism with respect to impact and cumulative impact. And I think that's really vital, because we're not starting from natural now. You know, a lot of these places had whalers back in the end of the heroic era. Secondly, the big news from the cameras. So yes, we and collaborators have lots of time series cameras looking at penguin and shag colonies around the Scotia Arc, but also by collaboration the rest of Antarctica. The headline for here is that pygoscelid breeding has advanced by 10 days to 14 days over the last 10 years. So when we're thinking of impacts with all of these things, like on whales, on krill, on penguins and seabirds, we need to think about a shifting environment and getting ahead of that with our risk assessment.
Thank you, Tom. I see Damon again, probably reflecting on what was said.
Hello there. Well, I initially put my hand up because Tom was struggling with his mic, and I wouldn't want to second guess what he's thinking, but I have long been an admirer of the work that he's doing, and do think that I think, Tom, you and your team have pioneered an approach that that I think does have legs. Now, one of the thoughts, number one, is if we go to the question, what are the pressures we're wanting to measure? I think that there are data from Tom's cameras, I'm not going to call it Tom, the Penguin Watch cameras, that if one was to do a thought experiment, that the ability to survey at a local scale, as Gina mentioned, instead of solely from a sort of satellite perspective, at a site level, where there is, if you like, potential for physical pressure from guests and indeed from all visitors, as has been highlighted, I think that there is definite scope for scaling of that, increasing of that. It's Tom may remember from when I previously was involved with IATO, I was of the view that a scale up of that would be a natural sort of idea of having surveillance across, if you like, most or if all of the sites that tourists regularly go to. The second point is it's not just numbers ashore. It's if we're looking at bioinvasive vectors. One of the other thoughts is saying that are we assuming that that is a tangible pressure? In which case, is there some way of gathering data on the number of vectors and indeed how where they're managing the risk associated with bioinvasives? With all the worry about avian flu coming up and the upcoming Antarctic summer season, it's bringing it to the front of our mind, and maybe also we've all become sensitized to that after COVID pandemic. Third thing that it strikes me is that is there something to be done around understanding better where visitors go, if we're talking more than just going ashore? From a Viking perspective, we are at the moment retasking the thousands of the monitoring we use for doing the COVID tracking, the proximity tracking. We have a project at the moment thinking about how to use those in a different way, because we've got thousands of them, and they look at proximity, they look at where people are and so on. So it's a way of offline tracking where people go, and this is a sort of project in development. But I think that there could be scope for understanding that, and maybe, I think I'm not the first to intervene on this, on the idea that it isn't we're looking for a smoking gun per se. We're wanting to understand better what the cumulative pressure / impact is. I don't know whether in this broad forum it's picking out what those clusters of pressures are. To me, that would be a worthwhile, if there are people on this call here who identifying the different types of pressures would be really helpful.
Anyone to react? I mean, we will present a bit more on this tomorrow and the day after, what we have identified so far. Okay, any other aspects that you want to raise or that is important?
Just a thought on that,
yeah.
maybe. I like that, actually, the idea that we're not looking for a smoking gun, because we're not starting from natural if we're monitoring now. We have a century of use of depletion of whales and now recovery, of krill fishing, of tourism and national programs. Like, we know there's degradation. If you look at Ardley Island for penguins, that has been heavily depleted over the years, and you can find some bad examples of cumulative impact. So I think we do need to start from what we think is natural, where the baseline is, and then fundamentally, it's very hard, but fundamentally work out where we want to be. I hope that sounds, yeah, I mean, it's hard, and we need to work out where we want to be rather than just, are we chasing any impacts? I think Jasmine Lee did excellent work on trying to understand all the different data that were out there and trying to understand use on the Antarctic Peninsula and how we could protect the most for the least. Also, another thought, have you guys been to Antarctica yet? Because I think it might be good for you to see some of these sites and what the trade-offs were.
Yeah, some of us have been. Ricardo, you wanted to say something.
Thank you. Ricardo Roura from ASOC. I have been involved in this kind of discussion for a number of years, and there hasn't been an instance in which the discussion on tourism doesn't expand to a discussion about other activities. So I think we need a bit of focus on this, and that's why I actually welcome this workshop. Now, the other point I want to make is impact is a value judgment. Again, in the protocol, impact is a value judgment. When is an impact and not just a minor or transitory change. So I think perhaps the way we have forward is to try to determine changes to the environment, try to identify those changes that potentially result from tourism, if that's possible, and then make that value judgment, which is what is required by the protocol. And now, I think there's nothing negative about the question, what is the likely contribution of tourism to environmental change, even at a local scale or small scale? I think there's nothing negative about that. It's a valid research question, and answering research questions requires focus, right? And also I think it's about responsibility from parties and also from the tourism industry, which I think they take seriously. So I think we shouldn't shrink from trying to identify what happens. I'm not saying, well, what is the impact of tourism? And then we're talking about bases or national public programs, which either, of course, have their own set of impacts. So that's all for me.
Thank you, Ricardo. Anyone who wants to react on this? Michaela?
Yeah, I just want to say a few words and say thank you for the great comments so far. I know many in this auditorium, but some of you might not know me, like Tom Hart, for instance. So I'm part in this project as a scientific consultant, let's say that way. And the first time I went to Antarctica was 1977, and since then I think I have been there like 50 times. And as expedition leader, as scientist, and also as a lecturer, I say this because I really see my part in this project also to communicate that tourism, as I have seen it grown in the last 20 or 30 years, is not the reason for all the changes we can see. So that's what I said before. There is a change in the shifting environment, and most likely it is anthropogenic, but caused by the climate change and not by any visitors on the small scale. And the background for this project, I see also that the CIP has actually announced that they want to have an on-site monitoring program, which the activeness of the site guidelines. So that means we look on a very small scale, and changes like you mentioned for Port Lockroy. This is a small scale with COVID visitors in or out. And the idea you had a couple of years ago with the cameras is great, but we need how can I say, we need a concept which goes further than in single publications. We need an overall monitoring concept which all the parties can contribute, and not we need a paper here, paper here, paper there, and we have to bring it together. This is kind of the idea of this project, to support the ATCM parties with a concept and bring things together, because we know there exist already good monitoring systems like your camera system, and we know that the tourists behave more or less good, and the work Ayato did for all the years did amount good change to tourism in Antarctica, and everybody cares, and we all share the concern about the environment in the Antarctic. So yeah, that's what I wanted to contribute. The idea is in this concept to bring things together and maybe go a little step further, bring the new technologies like satellites or aerial photos together, so we don't cause more impact through the monitoring concept, and also what is really practice to implement in the procedures. But I think there's a lot possible, as I see how much can really change due to avian influenza at the moment, or to other the other threats we had in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Any reactions on this? Comments? Tom?
No,
And then
thank you.
Rita.
Thank you, Michaela. Very welcome comments. I suppose my point is I worry with all of these that we just get the baseline right, where we've come from and where we want to be. Otherwise, I agree with that. I think well said on that.
Yeah, you said it a few times. You are not unnatural at the moment. I see this too. Being a biologist, I know we are not on the natural baseline, but we cannot turn the clock backwards. So with the monitoring concept, they have to start somewhere whenever we start, and can watch from then on. Yeah. There have been improved a lot in the last years, like there are more whales than before, but things like that. I know, but this is the question about. No?
Rita?
Yes, thank you. I also wanted to react briefly. I agree with the things that Michaela says. And I also want to share the perspective from the National Competent Authority of Germany, because we're doing this not to point the finger at the tourism industry and say you're bad for the Antarctic environment, but we have problems on the ATCM level to find good management solutions for touristic activities, for the rise of touristic activities that we've seen in the last couple of years. And we try to find methods to gain data so that we can make very good or well-informed decisions. And if we find data that we don't have to do anything because tourism actually is beneficial for the environment, then all the better. But we still need the data to make informed decisions. And this is the overall objective of this project in general. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rita. Anyone else? Damon, see you again.
Hello. Just building on the comments that have just been made, and not least Rita's contribution just a moment ago. If we draw from other locations, other themes, I'm drawing from, for example, monitoring of biodiversity. A challenge with that is that whatever scale, we want the big picture, as has been highlighted by Michaela, this idea of raising beyond sort of local site scale observation and monitoring to get a broader point. And I think that any metric that is complex, what we've learned from many other themes is that the moment it is complex, you get something sort of artifactive method, and that there will be those that have a predetermined idea of what the challenge is, and therefore any metric, no matter what it is, there is the risk that it will just get unpicked because it's not signaling in a way that's consistent with one's a priori view. Whilst the concept of evidence-based decision-making is a good one, I think that evidence suggests that most decisions are not evidence-based. And to go back to the point that Rita's making from a competent authority perspective is when you're saying that a lack of data to inform, I guess the question is, what are those feelings of those data? What we can learn from biodiversity monitoring is that very simple metrics done with many replicates do yield good results, and that simplicity is the key. And so I would basically, drawing from other themes, would encourage the idea that we identify monitoring metrics that are simple, that can be scaled. Now, whether that be a set of parameters that every visitor does, whether it be public or private or national body or scientific, whatever, if we do that, now we do it sort of through a PVR, but PVR on the whole tends to be private sector data. That's maybe my incomplete understanding of how these data are shared. Whether it be something that is, for example, every human interaction with the continent, few simple metrics have been collected. To me, that is the direction of travel that I think we will yield ultimately evidence that assists in our decision making. And every time we go complex, every time we try to solve everything in one go, I think we'll end up saying, well, we don't quite know, well, fancy that. You know, we all know that climate change is a profound driver of change in the Antarctica cross, especially in the peninsula where much of the tourism is going on. And Tom made this intervention first, and I guess I'm going to repeat it, that I profoundly feel that one of the challenges of this conversation is the word tourist is a pejorative term. We know that for years that's been debated at ATCM and elsewhere, and that nobody self-identifies as being a tourist. Everybody else is a tourist. Aside from Antarctica, tourism is something that other people do that is slightly disdainful. And as I'm sure many long-term participants of ATCM on this forum will know, that there has been many interventions made over many years by IATO to use the word visitor rather than the word tourist because of that negative connotation. Now, if we were to continue that from a monitoring point of view, what we're discussing, if you like, is visitor monitoring. And then what would tease out of that if one subset of those visitors, let's say those that are private sector going to enjoy Antarctica rather than maybe to live there or to work there for a sustained period and so on, we are much more likely, in my view, to be able to get towards meaningful interventions around what the pressures are, indeed what the mitigation strategy ought to be. Which is a long way of saying, I think that there are data already being gathered, and I think if we're systematic about that, I think over many years IATO has attempted to be systematic. I say attempted in a good way. I mean, those data are systematically gathered. I do think that there is scope for increased simple data being gathered. But the controversial thing, I smiled when Tom said how many of the forum have been to Antarctica. We don't want to sort of do a show and tell of how many times they've all been. But the key point is that we as humans, we as visitors, maybe we all ought to be doing the same things rather than putting the onus solely on those that happen to be paying a lot of money to go and visit the extraordinary place that others have the privilege of visiting as a government scientist or what have you.
Thank you very much. Rita?
Thank you, Thomas. Just a small comment. I agree with the visitor monitoring rather than the tourist monitoring, because we focus quite a lot on IATO visitors or IATO-based visitors, but I heard it from IATO already earlier that it's quite difficult to have even an overview of let's say the recreational activities of station personnel. This is still something that we have no idea what these guys are doing down there when no one is there to overlook them, like it would have been done in a cruise setting with expedition leaders and people to guide the visitors in that sense. Or what is how do we gather data from the people that are not going down there with an IATA operator, which are going down privately, and this is something that we also want to incorporate in our framework, because they can have an impact, probably. We don't know, but this is data that we need to get or we would like to get, and to get the broader picture in that sense.
Thank you, Rita. I have a more specific question to Damon and his experience with the biodiversity monitoring.
Wait, Tom was raising his hand. I'm sorry, but
sorry, I didn't say. Tom,
waved.
go ahead. Yeah, I'm on the wrong screen sometimes. I don't see all people on one screen. That's my problem. Tom, go ahead, please.
So yeah, simple things done well with lots of replication is entirely the point of what myself and Heather are doing. The huge limitation is that it's associative. I mean, really, this is what I worry about for krill and climate change, is that we are not able to do any manipulative study. We probably do in the long term need a couple of closed and opening sites for tourism, and that includes national programs as well. If we're going to understand this, we do actually need to manipulate it to see what is possible to stop change, to reverse it. Currently on the Antarctic Peninsula especially, climate change, loss of krill, recovery of whales, and tourism or human presence are all completely confounded. And they're confounded where we see the most change in wildlife populations. And it makes it incredibly hard to disentangle which stressors are causal.
Thank you. Okay, Damon, one question to you on your experiences with in the biodiversity sector. I mean, we have also discussed this issue of not having a baseline at where to start from, how to see the changes. Under the Water Framework Directive in Europe, we did the exercise of developing, based on historical data, etc., reference conditions which are close to pristine conditions, I would say, in most cases. I'm not sure how this is done in biodiversity, and are there any kind of experiences you could share? Because the other option could be like we did it with the CO2 concentration. We just set the 1990 year as a reference year for the concentrations in CO2 we have in the atmosphere. So any ideas on this?
Well, thank you. And I'm going to try and distill, if you like, decades of biodiversity monitoring across into something very tight. Firstly, there are two main baselines that have evolved in biodiversity monitoring. Number one is the concept which is used in modeling. So, for example, the Mattingly model, which was developed by WCMC and Microsoft about 10 years ago, which is 100 million cells. It's the largest, most complex biodiversity monitoring model at the time of global biodiversity. The baseline was picked to be just before the Industrial Revolution, sort of in the 1780s. So this idea that there is some abstract concept of pristine nature. The other baseline, which is an artifact of work that has been done by WWF, ZSL, IUCN, WCMC, and others, is 1970, which is actually the baseline of the Living Planet Index, which was the gathering of population data from many, many different taxa. And so what we tend to see now are stories about the change since 1970. That's what gets published in the WWF Living Planet report. That's what is often cited. 1970 is literally artifact of the fact that we happen to have a lot of data from that point. The idea there is measuring change rather than an absolute. I mean, I'm of the view, as Tom has cited as well, that the trying to work out what that baseline is, whether that be the day that humans first spotted the continent, and of course, because of the very unusual, unique nature of mass exploitation and then maybe sort of change and realization and protection, picking that baseline, I think, is going to be incredibly challenging. What biodiversity monitoring and changes, you look at trajectories. So you say, is it getting better or is it getting worse? And so if there was one thing that we learned about the there was the global biodiversity target of 2010 was to reduce the rate of loss of biodiversity. If you want to reduce a rate, you have to measure two rates. And the challenge there was that you needed 3 data points because you needed to measure change between. So even the wording of that target meant that we needed 3 points in time of baselines to measure reduction in rate of loss, which was seen as profoundly problematic. There was a paper in the journal Science that was published in 2010, which was the lead author is Stuart Butchart, with who's the lead scientist at BirdLife International, with many other authors, where we put together the story of global biodiversity as of 2010 and concluded that measuring absolutes is challenging, and that actually what we're looking for is, are things getting better or are they getting worse? it's not for me to say whether or not that is the collective wisdom of how we approach monitoring in the Antarctic, but that is, if you like, the collective understanding of a very similarly complex, challenging key driver of the natural world globally. To the point about whether we say, are we measuring against a baseline? The other challenge, as cited by looking at things like remote sensing, is that the technology is constantly improving. And if there is one thing that my take home of several years at WCMC is that surveillance, satellite surveillance, remote sensing, whatever, the desire to come, there's always like a series of new baselines as the sensors get better. And so when we're comparing with a previous time, there are very few data points where in time there is a comparison made. One of the profound, if you like, challenges of understanding the natural world is measuring land use change. And given that the technology to measure it keeps getting better, we very rarely make a comparison. We say, now we know, as opposed to saying, how was it using the older technology? And I worry that that will always be the case, that we are getting ever better at that, and we will just reset what our baseline is. To the point that Tom made in terms of understanding dynamic change with a reduced temporal element, so more rapidly, I just wanted to second what I thought Tom suggested, is that comparative studies are the way that in other thematic areas is the way to get to that information as rapidly as possible. And so I share Tom's view that whether that be closed versus open sites to all human visitation, of course, that's the key. A little bit like, although it was artifact maybe of other factors, the study that was undertaken by British Antarctic Survey at Port Lockroy, where looking at Jugler Point versus Goodyear Island, where there were sort of different regimes of human activity. To me, that is going to be the way that that we find that. Maybe that will come artifact of closures for other reasons in the coming months with HPI, I don't know. But it's that, if you like, was the take home from my experience with biodiversity. And not trying to overstate my role, but just to say I was the coordinator of the Global Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, which was 41 agencies around the world monitoring global biodiversity. And so whilst I didn't have all the answers, I was at least party to, from the Secretariat, to all the different work that was being done, including the development of the MSFD indicators, the 11 indicators. So whenever that was, 2013 or whatever, 2012. So there is some lessons I think we can genuinely take from experts in those sectors.
Yes,
I'm biased that what I see now in Antarctica is incredibly similar to that substantial period of my career looking at this. And I do think we're not starting from ground zero here. I think we can really learn from that world. My old employer, the World Conservation Monitoring Centre, has 180 people that are expert in this. And of course, they're based in Cambridge in the UK, which is where I'm talking to you from here. And of course, there's other expertise around the world as well on this. And what I notice in the UN system is that Antarctica is always a bit other. That there tends to be the rest of the UN system talks about stuff, and then Antarctica does its own thing. I mean, there are political reasons why that happens. But I do think in this instance that we could really draw on decades of lessons, tough lessons learned, to come up with a monitoring and a regime of relevant indicators that we don't have to kind of agonize too much on, you know, the philosophical points. We can draw on what has worked.
thank you for that. But I think what is important here is to define probably the fact that the baseline will be a year, and then from there we just monitor the changes, because there is quite some tendency to really have an absolute system. And I think that is definitely mission impossible. But to say, okay, we agree political on this baseline with the data we have, and then we take it from there and see what the changes are. Could be a way forward. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I fully agree on the technology. I mean, this is something I realize also with Copernicus in Europe. Every time they are setting up new satellites, the data gets better, and yeah, I know this kind of discussions. Yeah.
Could I be so bold to say that maybe the entire conversation of baselines is too challenging, and that to progress this conversation, if we're looking for trajectories, I mean, again, I cite Tom again. I'm sorry, Tom, being fanboying you here. Where the idea with looking at whales, for example, that if we had a baseline 20 years ago, what we're seeing in whale populations is beyond the baseline, is fantastic. It's a good positive trajectory, and that if we concentrate on measuring trajectories rather than baselines, I have a feeling that whether it be technically or politically, we're never going to agree where that baseline should be, and that we put our efforts now into this workshop. I mean, that's a suggestion, into looking at what we have as available and how we measure those changes, and with a view that our aim is that we want everything to be improving.
Thanks, Tom, for sharing the link Damon was referring to in the chat.
So Damon mentioned the Living Planet Index, and in a way, all of these are conceptually similar, but we've applied this to penguins. The challenge remains that now you can summarize the data for what you're interested in. The challenge is, do you have the covariates to explain it? And that's the big challenge. We haven't got whale censuses and whale populations on the same scale, the same interval as we can measure penguins. Penguins have been convenient because they're on land, they're on large flat colonies, and we can see them. So they have been a useful indicator. Levels of tourism have been relatively well preserved in terms of granular data, but whales and krill, as the other explanatory variables, have been incredibly poorly recorded. So yeah, I think what it comes back to is, again, the idea of, can we have an experiment if we're actually going to disentangle these threats?
Gina.
Yeah, so Tom, I think your points regarding the other aspects is very important. And I agree that the data set probably isn't there yet regarding whales. We do know that on some of our vessels, there are scientists that have been trying to get an appreciation for abundance of whale populations, specifically around the peninsula. So quite a bit of work was done last year in surveys with a couple of different groups, as well as one of our vessels had a organization called Orca participating, and they were grabbing a lot of different data. And then to supplement that all, last year at IATO, we actually rolled out a program that we refer to as VCAPS, which is the Voluntary Cetacean and Pinniped Sighting Program. We did this to see if we can, understand where the population is and across multiple species. Historically, we have relied on the data that we were getting from Happy Whale to help make some of the decisions regarding geofenced zones that we've put in. But we did see a need to further expand that out. So last year we rolled that out to the membership. We had, I would say, consistent participation. It wasn't as high as maybe I would have liked, but we did have consistent participation. And that also let us have an appreciation that we were able to add 2 new geofence zones, as well as expand the timing of one of our geofence zones. The problem or the challenge with the data that we're collecting right now is that it's not to measure abundance, which I think, Tom, is what's really needed from what you're getting at. But it did give us a good perspective on presence. And presence can sometimes help us make other management decisions that are needed along the way. But there is definitely more work that's going out there. Like I mentioned, Orca's doing one, and then I'm aware of another program that is also trying to measure abundance. So I'm optimistic that we're going to start seeing some good data start to come out of that within the next year or two. But then there's still the problem with krill, which I think is, as the keystone species, really ends up being the big issue.
Thank you for that, Gina. Any further comments, in particular of those who have not said anything so far? If not, I think we can close this session now. I'm really happy about all the contributions that have been made, and also the information and practical, let's say practical input we got to look into in the next month. I think we can close the workshop in general a bit earlier, so that people are appreciating a bit more time to work on other things and or go to bed or get your morning coffee wherever you are. Rita, do you want to say a final comment for today?
Yes, I just generally like to thank you for all the valuable input that we will take into consideration for our project and everything. And I hope that we will see most of you tomorrow again, and for the next series of discussions. So thank you for everything. And back to
tomorrow.
Thomas.
The focus is on sea-based elements and pressures and monitoring we can do from ships on. So I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Have a good morning, have a good lunch, or have a good sleep. See you tomorrow at 1 o'clock Central European time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. See you.
Thank you.